The morning sun cast long shadows across the Riverside Memorial Bridge when the first cable snapped. Metal screamed against metal, a sound that would haunt the survivors forever, as the suspension towers began their terrible dance of destruction. Cars plunged 30 feet into the churning brown waters below, their occupants trapped in a nightmare of twisted steel and rushing current. Emergency sirens wailed across the city as rescue boats fought desperately to reach the submerged vehicles. But time had already claimed its victims. By noon, the death toll would reach 37 souls, making it the deadliest bridge collapse in the state's history. 3 hours earlier, the bridge had carried its usual morning traffic commuters heading to work, students bound for classes, families starting their daily routines. Among them, a small group of disabled activists had gathered at the pedestrian walkway, their wheelchairs and mobility aids creating a peaceful cluster near the bridge's center span. They held handmade signs reading, "Access for all," and "Ramps save lives," their voices joining in gentle chants that barely rose above the traffic noise. "We've been fighting for these accessibility upgrades for 3 years," said Marcus Chen, adjusting his wheelchair's position to catch the morning breeze. His weathered hands gripped a sign demanding elevator installation at both ends of the bridge. 3 years of city council meetings, petitions, and empty promises. Beside him, Sarah Rodriguez leaned heavily on her walker, her arthritis making the early morning protest more challenging than usual. "My grandmother used to cross this bridge every day to reach the medical center. When she started needing assistance, she had to take a 40-minute detour just to find accessible transport." Her voice carried the weight of personal loss. She died waiting for an ambulance that couldn't reach her quickly enough because of routes like this. The group of 12 activists had chosen this location strategically. The Riverside Memorial Bridge served as the primary connection between the downtown core and the city's largest medical complex. Yet it remained completely inaccessible to anyone who couldn't navigate stairs. Their peaceful demonstration aimed to highlight this critical gap in public infrastructure during the morning commute, when visibility would be highest. Elena Valdez, a social worker who had organized the protest, checked her watch. "Remember, we're here until 11 o'clock. Stay peaceful, stay visible, and stay focused on our message." She moved between the protesters with practiced efficiency, ensuring everyone had water and adjusting signs that had been twisted by the wind. The activists had obtained proper permits, coordinated with local police, and even arranged for volunteer traffic directors to ensure pedestrian safety. Their preparation showed in the orderly formation they maintained, leaving clear paths for other bridge users while maximizing their message's visibility. From her luxury sedan, idling in traffic just 50 yards away, Karen Whitmore observed the protesters with undisguised contempt. Her manicured fingers drummed against the leather steering wheel as she waited for the light to change, her perfectly styled blonde hair framing a face that had hardened into perpetual disapproval. At 48, Karen had built her identity around neighborhood watch committees, homeowner associations, and a deeply held belief that her comfort took precedence over everyone else's needs. "This is exactly what's wrong with this city," she muttered to herself, reaching for her phone. The protesters' presence offended her sense of order, their visibility an affront to her morning routine. She had important meetings today, a real estate closing, lunch with the country club board, and a massage appointment that she'd scheduled weeks in advance. Traffic moved slowly around the demonstration, with most drivers showing patience or even supportive gestures. Several commuters rolled down windows to voice encouragement, and one delivery truck driver honked in solidarity. But Karen saw only disruption to her perfectly planned day. Her phone screen lit up as she scrolled through her contacts, stopping at the emergency services number. A plan began forming in her mind, one born of privilege and prejudice rather than genuine concern. She had used similar tactics before calling police on children selling lemonade without permits, reporting landscapers for suspicious activity, and once memorably summoning animal control over a neighbor's therapy dog. The call connected on the second ring. 911, what's your emergency? I'm on the Riverside Memorial Bridge, and there's a group of people tampering with the bridge structure, Karen said, her voice adopting the urgent tone she had perfected through years of false reports. They have tools, and they're doing something to the support cables. This looks very dangerous. The dispatcher's voice sharpened with concern. Ma'am, can you describe what you're seeing exactly? There are at least a dozen people with metal objects near the bridge supports. Some of them are in wheelchairs, which makes me think they might be trying to hide their equipment. Karen's imagination expanded her lie in real time. I can see them working on something mechanical near the base of the tower. This could be some kind of sabotage. The word sabotage triggered immediate protocols. Within minutes, police units received high-priority dispatches reporting potential infrastructure terrorism on the bridge. The dispatcher's voice crackled through radio systems across the city. All units respond to possible bridge tampering incident. Suspects described as organized group with potential explosive devices or structural modification tools. Squad cars converged on the bridge from both directions, their sirens cutting through the morning air. Officer Jake Martinez, responding from the east side, felt his adrenaline spike as he processed the dispatcher's updates. Terrorism against critical infrastructure represented every officer's nightmare scenario, the potential for mass casualties and citywide panic. Unit 712 approaching bridge from downtown side. Martinez radioed. I can see a group of individuals with signs near the center span. Assessing situation now. As police vehicles surrounded the peaceful protesters, Elena Valdez raised her hands in confusion. Officers, we have permits for this demonstration. Is there a problem? Martinez approached, with his hand resting on his service weapon, his training overriding his initial observation that these appeared to be ordinary protesters. We've received reports of tampering with bridge infrastructure. We need everyone to step away from the supports immediately. Tampering. Marcus Chen's wheelchair turned toward the approaching officers. We're holding a peaceful protest for disability rights. Our permits are right here. He reached slowly for the documents in his bag, careful to announce his movements. But the dispatcher's voice continued feeding information to the responding units. Caller reports seeing tools and mechanical equipment. Suspects may have concealed devices and mobility aids. Approach with extreme caution. The accusation hit the protesters like a physical blow. Sarah Rodriguez leaned harder on her walker, her legs trembling with a combination of fear and outrage. You think we're terrorists because we use mobility aids. Everyone needs to move away from the bridge supports now, Martinez commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who believed he was preventing a catastrophe. Place your hands where we can see them and step back slowly. Elena tried to maintain calm despite the surreal situation unfolding around her. Officer Martinez, I can see your nameplate. We've coordinated this demonstration with Sergeant Williams at the 4th Precinct. We have documentation proving— Documentation can be forged, interrupted Officer Lisa Zhang, arriving from the west side. We have credible reports of structural sabotage in progress. Everyone needs to comply immediately or face arrest. The protesters found themselves surrounded by 8 patrol cars and 16 officers. Their peaceful demonstration transformed into what appeared to be a major terrorism response. Commuters slowed to observe the spectacle, cell phone cameras capturing footage that would soon flood social media with contradictory narratives. From her sedan, Karen watched the scene unfold with satisfaction. Her false report had achieved exactly what she intended: the removal of protesters who had disrupted her morning routine. She began composing social media posts about dangerous radicals being apprehended on the bridge, already crafting her version of events for the neighborhood watch group chat. Meanwhile, in the city's Department of Transportation office, structural engineer David Kim received an automated alert about police activity on the Riverside Memorial Bridge. His computer screen displayed real-time data from sensors embedded throughout the bridge structure, and what he saw made his blood run cold. "Janet, come look at this," he called to his supervisor, his voice tight with alarm. The monitoring system showed stress readings far beyond normal parameters, particularly in the main suspension cables. "The bridge is showing critical structural anomalies." Janet Foster hurried over, her coffee mug forgotten as she studied the data. "These readings suggest immediate load redistribution failure. The cables are operating at 94% of tolerance." Her face paled as she processed the implications. "We need to close the bridge immediately." David was already reaching for the emergency protocol manual. "I'm calling the police dispatch to request immediate bridge closure. These numbers indicate imminent structural failure." But when David called the emergency dispatcher, his report met with confusion and delay. "Sir, we currently have a terrorism response in progress on that bridge. Our officers are handling a structural sabotage attempt. Can your concerns wait until the scene is secure?" "No, they absolutely cannot wait." David's voice carried desperate urgency. "The bridge is showing critical failure indicators right now. You need to evacuate all traffic immediately, including your officers. We're looking at potential collapse within the hour." The dispatcher, overwhelmed by the apparent coincidence of a sabotage report and structural emergency, made a fateful decision to prioritize the terrorism response. "Sir, if terrorists are actively compromising the bridge structure, our officers need to stop them first. Engineering concerns will be addressed once the scene is secured." On the bridge, the arrest of disabled protesters proceeded with methodical efficiency. Marcus Chen's wheelchair was searched thoroughly, officers examining every component for hidden weapons or explosive devices. His colostomy bag was inspected, despite his protests about dignity and medical privacy. "This is humiliating," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying decades of experience with discrimination. "We're being treated like criminals for asking for basic accessibility." Sarah Rodriguez sat in the back of a patrol car, her walker confiscated as potential evidence. Through the window, she watched officers dismantling their protest signs, searching for hidden compartments or threatening messages. The irony wasn't lost on her advocates for better accessibility were being arrested while using the very infrastructure they sought to improve. Elena coordinated with a civil rights attorney by phone, her call taking place while handcuffed in another patrol car. "Yes, we had full permits. Yes, we followed every protocol. The officers received false information from someone claiming we were terrorists." The attorney's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "This sounds like another case of activist while disabled. I'll file emergency motions within the hour, but document everything you can remember about the arrest procedures." As police vehicles transported the protesters to jail for processing, traffic on the bridge began moving more freely. Karen's plan had succeeded beyond her expectations. Not only were the inconvenient protesters removed, but their arrest would likely discourage future demonstrations. She pulled into a coffee shop parking lot to compose a detailed social media post about her heroic report of suspicious activity. Her fingers flew across the phone screen. "Just prevented potential terrorist attack on Riverside Bridge. Noticed suspicious individuals tampering with structural components and immediately called 911. Thank goodness for alert citizens willing to report dangerous activity." These radical activists will stop at nothing to push their agenda, even if it means endangering innocent lives. Bridge safety. Citizen watch. Terrorism prevention. The post gained immediate traction in Karen's social circles, with likes and shares multiplying across neighborhood Facebook groups and next-door forums. Her narrative of heroic vigilance against domestic terrorism resonated with followers who shared her worldview about protesters and social activists. But at the Department of Transportation, David Kim's warnings became increasingly desperate. The bridge sensors now showed multiple critical failure points, with stress readings approaching maximum tolerances across all major structural elements. "Janet, we're out of time," David said, his voice breaking with the weight of impending catastrophe. "The eastern support tower is showing microfractures, and the main cables are experiencing load redistribution that exceeds design parameters. We need to close this bridge immediately, regardless of police operations." Janet Foster made the decision that would haunt her for years to come. Call the mayor's office directly. If the police won't listen to engineering concerns, maybe political pressure will cut through the confusion. Mayor Robert Chen answered his emergency line personally, his voice alert despite the early hour. "Janet, talk to me. What's the situation?" "Mr. Mayor, the Riverside Memorial Bridge is showing critical structural failure indicators. Our sensors detect imminent collapse risk, but police dispatch refuses to close the bridge due to an ongoing terrorism response. We need your authority to override their decision." The mayor's political instincts warred with engineering urgency. Closing a major bridge based on sensor data during a terrorism investigation could appear weak or premature. But ignoring professional engineering advice during a potential structural emergency carried even greater risks. "Give me 5 minutes to coordinate with the police chief," Mayor Chen decided. "If we're closing the bridge during an active investigation, I need to ensure it doesn't compromise public safety in other ways." Those 5 minutes would prove to be 5 minutes too many. At 8:47 a.m., while David Kim waited for authorization to close the bridge, the first suspension cable snapped with a sound like thunder. The eastern tower tilted 3 degrees past its design tolerance, sending shockwaves through the entire structure. Cars in the center span felt the roadway shift beneath their tires, but most drivers attributed the sensation to heavy truck traffic or construction vibrations. Karen had just finished responding to congratulatory comments on her social media post when she felt her sedan shake slightly. She glanced up from her phone to see other drivers looking around in confusion, their vehicles all experiencing the same subtle tremor. "Probably just a large truck passing," she muttered, returning her attention to the flood of supportive messages praising her alertness and civic responsibility. The irony of her location still on the structurally failing bridge she had helped clear of protesters escaped her completely. In the transportation department, alarms began screaming across multiple monitoring systems. David Kim watched in horror as structural readings cascaded beyond all safety parameters. The bridge's sophisticated sensor network painted a real-time picture of progressive collapse, each data point confirming his worst-case scenario. "It's happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the alarm klaxons. "The bridge is failing right now." Janet Foster grabbed her radio to broadcast the emergency on all city frequencies. "This is transportation control to all units. Immediate evacuation of Riverside Memorial Bridge required. Structural collapse imminent. Repeat, structural collapse imminent." But the warning came 30 seconds too late. The second cable snapped at 8:48 a.m., its failure triggering a catastrophic chain reaction throughout the suspension system. The bridge deck began its terrible descent, carrying 63 vehicles and their occupants toward the dark waters below. Metal shrieked against metal as support structures twisted beyond their limits, creating a symphony of destruction that echoed across the entire city. Karen's sedan was among the first to fall. Her final social media post about preventing terrorism interrupted by the very tragedy her false report had helped precipitate. Her phone, still displaying congratulations from neighbors, tumbled with her into the river that would claim 37 lives before noon. The Riverside Memorial Bridge collapsed in sections, each span following the next, in a domino effect of structural failure. Emergency responders who had been focused on processing arrested protesters suddenly found themselves facing the largest disaster in the city's history. At the county jail, Marcus Chen and his fellow activists watched coverage of the collapse on a common room television, their faces reflecting a complex mixture of horror and vindication. The very infrastructure they had been protesting and been arrested for allegedly sabotaging had failed exactly as disability rights advocates had warned for years. 37 people, Sarah Rodriguez whispered, her voice barely audible over the news anchor's grim recitation of casualty figures. 37 people died because someone decided our peaceful protest was more dangerous than actual structural problems. Elena paced the holding cell, her mind racing through the implications of the tragedy. We were trying to save lives by improving accessibility. Instead, we were arrested while the real danger went unaddressed. The cruel irony wasn't lost on any of them. Advocates for infrastructure improvement had been silenced while the infrastructure literally collapsed. News coverage of the disaster initially focused on the dramatic rescue efforts and rising death toll, but questions about the response timeline began emerging within hours. Investigative reporters discovered the timeline of events: disabled protesters arrested for alleged sabotage. At the same time, engineers tried desperately to warn about actual structural failure. Channel 7's lead investigator, Maria Santos, was among the first to connect the dots. Her evening broadcast would become legendary in journalism circles. Tonight, Channel 7. News has uncovered troubling questions about this morning's bridge collapse. Sources within the Transportation Department confirm that engineers detected critical structural failure at the exact time police were arresting disability rights protesters for alleged sabotage. The broadcast continued with exclusive audio from David Kim's desperate calls to emergency dispatch. These are the actual recordings of city engineers trying to warn about bridge failure, while police focused on protesters who posed no actual threat. The question we must ask is how many lives could have been saved if engineering warnings had received the same priority as false terrorism reports. Public outrage began building as details emerged about the coordinated police response to arrest peaceful protesters while ignoring expert warnings about structural failure. Social media filled with demands for accountability and investigations into the decision-making process that had prioritized false reports over engineering expertise. But the story took its most dramatic turn 3 days after the collapse, when city maintenance worker Tommy Rodriguez made a discovery that would change everything. While inspecting security footage from the bridge's monitoring system, Tommy noticed something that made him pause the video and replay it several times. "Hey supervisor, you need to see this," Tommy called to his manager, pointing at the screen. The timestamp showed 6:15 a.m., more than 2 hours before Karen's 911 call. In the grainy footage, a blonde woman in expensive clothes could be seen using some kind of tool near the base of the eastern support tower. The supervisor studied the footage carefully, enhancing the digital image to reveal details that would shock the investigation team. Is she actually damaging the support cables? Enhanced analysis of the security footage revealed the truth that would transform the entire narrative surrounding the bridge collapse. Karen Whitmore had arrived at the bridge before dawn, armed with bolt cutters and a small saw specifically designed to compromise structural cables. The footage showed her spending nearly 45 minutes systematically weakening critical support elements. Most damning of all was footage showing Karen making her 911 call while looking directly at the disabled protesters, her lips clearly forming the words that had triggered their arrest. She had sabotaged the bridge, then called police to blame the very people whose presence threatened to expose her crime. FBI investigators arrived within hours of the footage's discovery, led by Special Agent Patricia Williams, who specialized in domestic terrorism cases. Agent Williams had seen many examples of false flag operations, but the scale and cruelty of Karen's plan shocked even her experienced team. This represents premeditated mass murder disguised as civic responsibility. Agent Williams announced at the press conference that would captivate national attention. The suspect deliberately weakened critical structural elements, then used emergency services to remove potential witnesses by falsely accusing them of the crime she had just committed. The revelation that Karen Whitmore had orchestrated both the sabotage and the false terrorism report sent shockwaves through communities nationwide. Her social media posts, initially praised by neighbors as heroic vigilance, were now recognized as evidence of consciousness of guilt and deliberate misdirection. Karen's arrest took place at her country club, where she was having lunch with fellow board members and discussing her newfound fame as a terrorism prevention hero. FBI agents surrounded her table as she finished describing her brave decision to report suspicious activists to law enforcement. Karen Whitmore, you're under arrest for 37 counts of first-degree murder, domestic terrorism, and federal infrastructure sabotage, Agent Williams announced, her voice carrying across the club's dining room. Karen's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, anger, and finally terror, as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "This is insane!" Karen protested as other diners stared in shock. "I'm the one who prevented terrorism. I'm the hero in this situation. Those activists were the real threat." But her protests fell on deaf ears as evidence mounted against her. The security footage was just the beginning. Investigators found purchased receipts for the tools used in sabotage, internet search histories showing research into bridge structural weaknesses, and most damning of all, detailed notes outlining her plan to eliminate troublesome activists while creating plausible deniability. Marcus Chen learned of Karen's arrest while still in county jail, awaiting release after charges were dropped. The news hit him with a complex mixture of vindication and grief justice for the false accusations. But 37 people had died because of one woman's hatred and prejudice. "She killed 37 innocent people to frame us for terrorism," Marcus said quietly to Elena as they processed the revelation. "Every person who died in that collapse was murdered because someone decided our existence was threatening enough to justify mass killing." Elena nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "And if we hadn't been there protesting, if we hadn't been visible enough to make her angry, she might have gotten away with calling it accidental structural failure." The irony was inescapable. The very protest that Karen had tried to silence had inadvertently created the witnesses and timeline that would expose her crime. Their peaceful demonstration for disability rights had become the key evidence that would bring a mass murderer to justice. Karen's trial began 6 months after the bridge collapse, held in the largest courtroom available due to massive public interest. Prosecutor James Mitchell built his case methodically, presenting security footage, digital evidence, and expert testimony about the deliberate nature of the structural sabotage. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case represents domestic terrorism in its most calculated form. Prosecutor Mitchell's opening statement began. "The defendant didn't just kill 37 innocent people. She weaponized law enforcement emergency services, and public prejudice against disabled citizens to cover up her crimes. The prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Digital forensics revealed Karen's online research into bridge vulnerabilities, her purchase of specialized cutting tools, and her detailed planning timeline spanning several weeks. Most compelling was her own social media activity, which showed escalating hostility toward disability rights activists in the months preceding the attack. Karen's defense attorney, struggling with an impossible case, attempted to argue temporary insanity brought on by traffic stress and general anxiety. My client's actions were the result of severe psychological pressure and social anxiety, not premeditated terrorism. But the prosecution's psychiatric expert demolished this defense during cross-examination. The level of planning, research, and methodical execution shown in this case is completely incompatible with any form of temporary mental incapacitation. This defendant spent weeks preparing to commit mass murder while maintaining normal social functioning. Marcus Chen took the witness stand to describe the peaceful nature of their protest and the devastating impact of false terrorism accusations. His testimony, delivered from his wheelchair with quiet dignity, provided powerful contrast to Karen's calculated cruelty. "We weren't terrorists," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of his words. "We were citizens, asking for basic accessibility improvements that could have saved lives in emergencies. Instead, we were falsely accused of the very crime that someone else had already committed." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: 37 counts of first-degree murder, domestic terrorism, federal infrastructure sabotage, filing false police reports, and obstruction of justice. The speed of their decision reflected the overwhelming nature of the evidence against Karen. Judge Rebecca Torres, delivering the sentence that would end Karen's life of privilege and prejudice, spoke directly to the broader implications of the case. This court has rarely encountered such calculated cruelty disguised as civic duty. The defendant murdered 37 innocent people, then attempted to frame disabled activists for her own crimes. The sentence is life imprisonment without possibility of parole on each count of murder, to be served consecutively. The mathematical impossibility of Karen's sentence over 900 years in federal prison served as a powerful symbol of justice for victims' families and disability rights advocates who had watched the case with intense interest. But the trial's end marked the beginning of broader social reconsideration about disability rights, infrastructure accessibility, and the dangers of prejudice disguised as public safety concerns. The bridge collapse had become a catalyst for national conversations that advocates had been trying to initiate for decades. 6 months after Karen's sentencing, ground was broken on the new Riverside Memorial Bridge, designed with universal accessibility as its primary architectural principle. The bridge would feature elevators, ramps, accessible emergency exits, and barrier-free design throughout. A memorial plaza honored the 37 victims, while celebrating the disability rights advocates whose courage had helped expose the truth. Elena Valdez, now serving as the city's first disability rights ombudsman, spoke at the groundbreaking ceremony to a crowd of thousands. 37 people died because someone decided that disabled citizens asking for basic rights represented a threat worth killing to eliminate. We build this bridge not just as memorial to those we lost, but as promise that accessibility is a human right, not a privilege to be granted or denied. Marcus Chen, his wheelchair positioned prominently in the front row, watched the ceremony with complex emotions. The new bridge would save countless lives and provide the accessibility that advocates had demanded for years. But its construction was built on the foundation of 37 deaths that could have been prevented. "Progress built on tragedy," Marcus murmured to Sarah Rodriguez, who had become a close friend through their shared ordeal. "I wish it didn't take mass murder to make people listen to our concerns about infrastructure accessibility." Sarah nodded, leaning on the walker that had once been searched for terrorist weapons. "But maybe now, when we advocate for accessibility improvements, people will remember that ignoring our concerns can have deadly consequences." Karen showed the world what happens when prejudice against disabled people combines with positions of privilege. The Riverside Memorial Bridge reopened 18 months after the collapse, its gleaming accessibility features serving as a testament to both human progress and the deadly cost of prejudice. The bridge carried a bronze plaque listing the names of all 37 victims, along with text that read, "Their lives were lost to hatred disguised as concern. Their memory demands that we build a world where accessibility is universal and prejudice finds no fertile ground." On opening day, thousands of people crossed the new bridge in the inaugural Walk for Access event. Disabled activists, who had once been arrested as terrorists, were now honored as heroes whose courage had helped expose mass murder and transform public consciousness about disability rights. Elena stood at the bridge's center span, looking down at the memorial flowers that still marked the site of the collapse. The water below ran cleaner now, part of environmental improvements that had accompanied the bridge reconstruction, but she could still see the shadows of that terrible morning when hatred had literally brought down the infrastructure that connected communities. "Karen thought she could eliminate us by framing us for terrorism," Elena said to the gathered crowd, her voice carrying clearly across the new bridge. Instead, she showed the world exactly why disability rights matter and how dangerous prejudice becomes when it hides behind concern for public safety. The crowd that day included survivors of other bridge collapses, family members of victims, engineering professionals who had learned hard lessons about emergency response priorities, and thousands of people with disabilities who had found their voices through tragedy transformed into advocacy. In her federal prison cell, Karen Whitmore watched news coverage of the bridge opening with mounting fury. Her appeals had all failed. Her social media accounts were permanently banned, and the country club had revoked her membership while issuing formal apologies for her past leadership roles. The comfortable life of privilege and prejudice she had built was gone forever, replaced by decades of solitary reflection on the consequences of hatred. But beyond prison walls, the bridge stood as testament to human resilience and the power of truth to emerge from even the most calculated deception. Every accessible ramp, every elevator, every barrier-free pathway represented victory over the kind of thinking that had once dismissed disabled lives as expendable obstacles to convenience. The Riverside Memorial Bridge became a pilgrimage site for disability rights advocates from around the world, who came to see living proof that accessibility could be beautiful, functional, and life-saving when designed with universal principles from the foundation up. The bridge demonstrated that infrastructure built for everyone served everyone better than systems designed only for the temporarily able-bodied. As years passed, and the bridge continued serving its community with distinction, the story of its tragic origins served as cautionary tale about the deadly consequences of prejudice disguised as civic responsibility. Karen Whitmore's name became synonymous with false reporting and domestic terrorism, while the activists she had tried to frame were remembered as heroes whose courage had saved countless future lives. The bridge endured, carrying traffic safely across waters that had once claimed 37 innocent lives to satisfy one woman's hatred. Its accessible design welcomed people of all abilities. Its memorial honored the dead, and its very existence proved that even the most calculated evil could ultimately serve justice when truth finally emerged into the light. In the end, Karen's plan had succeeded in ways she never intended. She had eliminated protesters from the bridge that morning, but in doing so, She had created martyrs whose cause would transform accessibility legislation nationwide. She had tried to silence disabled voices forever, but instead had amplified them beyond anything peaceful protest could have achieved alone. The Riverside Memorial Bridge stood as monument to the truth that hatred ultimately defeats itself when it encounters the combined forces of courage, evidence, and justice. 37 lives had been lost to prejudice, disguised as public safety, but millions of future lives would be protected by the accessibility standards their deaths had made possible. Every morning, as the sun cast shadows across its accessible walkways and barrier-free design, the bridge reminded all who crossed it that the price of prejudice is always too high, and the value of inclusion immeasurable. The bridge Karen Whitmore had destroyed in hatred had been reborn in hope, carrying forward the memory of those who died and the dreams of those who survived to build a better world.